Welcome to First Chapter Fridays. For this week's edition, we are going to read What is Nintendo by Gina Shaw. So sit back, relax, and use your imagination as we read this official Who HQ book. What is Nintendo? In 1979, an engineer who worked at Nintendo was taking a long train ride. His name was Gunpei Yokoi. On the trip, he noticed a passenger playing with a calculator, pressing all the buttons on it. Gunpei Yokoi was fascinated. At that time, Nintendo made large-size arcade games with big joysticks. But it suddenly struck him that a handheld gaming device might also be fun. So he brought his idea to the president of Nintendo. Did he like the idea? Yes, a lot. Right away, Gunpei Yokoi and his team started to develop the Game & Watch. It was the perfect time for this. Liquid crystal display, an LCD technology that had become inexpensive, and video games were now big business. The finished product could fit in a child's hand. It had only one game that was played on a screen. The Game & Watch was cheap and had a long battery life. Most important of all, the game was fun to play. The first game was Ball, and it was sold around the world. Gunpei Yokoi had done it. The Game & Watch was a major success. Between 1980 and 1991, Gunpei Yokoi's team created 60 different Game & Watch devices. Gunpei Yokoi worked from a single, simple idea. Because of his creative ability, he helped Nintendo make history in the video game industry. Chapter 1, All in the Family. Nintendo was founded in Kyoto, Japan, all the way back in 1889 by Fushajiro Yamaguchi. He was a woodblock painter and artist. His new company made beautiful playing cards called Hanafuda. The name comes from a combination of the Japanese words for flower and card. The cards were made from tree bark. The ink for the designs was made from flower petals and berries. At this time in Japan, the government banned all playing cards because gambling was against the law, and many card games involved gambling. After a while, though, the government let Nintendo sell its cards because they didn't have numerals and were so beautiful. In each deck of cards, there are 12 suits, each named for a month of the year and a flower. Each suit contains 4 cards, making a total of 48 cards. Many different card games can be played with these cards. The cards sold well in Japan, but nowhere else. So Nintendo remained a medium-sized playing card company. To become bigger, it would need to head in new directions. In 1929, after 40 years as president of Nintendo, Fushajiro Yamaguchi retired. His daughter had married a man who had been adopted by Fushajiro. His name was Seikiro Kanade Yamaguchi, and he was the next president of Nintendo. When he took over Nintendo, it was the largest playing card company in Japan. In his 20 years as president, he made Nintendo much more efficient by introducing an assembly line of workers and building a large sales force and factory. He retired in 1949 and chose his 22-year-old grandson to run the company. Hiroshi Yamahochi had been raised by his grandparents from the time he was 5. He had a difficult childhood. His grandparents were very strict. To prepare him to become the next president of Nintendo, they sent him to a school where he would study either law or engineering. But World War II interrupted his grandparents' plans. In 1939, when Hiroshi was 12 years old, the Japanese government forced him to quit school. World War II was raging. Hiroshi was too young to fight. Instead, he had to work in a military factory for several years. After the war ended in 1945, he studied to become a lawyer. But he left law school when his grandfather chose him to take over Nintendo. From the start, Hiroshi was a strong and bold leader. He took the job only after being told that he could fire his relatives at Nintendo. Why was that important to him? He wanted to make sure that no one in the company thought he was favoring his family. And he also didn't want any relatives challenging his authority. His grandfather did not like this idea, but he agreed to it. Many workers didn't think Hiroshi had enough experience to run the company. So in 1955, some workers went on strike. During a strike, people stop working in order to protest what they don't like. To show the protesters who was boss, Hiroshi fired all of them too. Although he got off to a rocky start as president, he gained the respect of workers by leading Nintendo to great success. In 1959, he made a deal with the Walt Disney Company. Well-known Disney cartoon characters were featured on Nintendo's plastic playing cards. The deck of cards came with a booklet that gave instructions for different card games. The packs were very popular and more than 600,000 units were sold in the first year. That wasn't enough for Hiroshi. He wanted to try other business besides cards. He started a taxi service, a chain of hotels, and a TV network. He also tried selling packets of instant rice. None of these businesses, however, were successful, and Hiroshi had to close all of them. At the same time, people were losing interest in playing cards. What would come next for Nintendo? That concludes the first chapter in What is Nintendo by Gina Shaw. Stop by the library to pick up the book to find out what happens next for Nintendo. Or stop by the library to pick up one of the other books in the Who HQ series. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of First Chapter Fridays. I hope you join us next time.